Welcome to the 10th episode of the ClassCast Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Tibbens. Today, we're talking with Ian Serotkin, the candidate for Loudoun County School Board in the Blue Ridge District. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Tired. It's a long week, but I don't get to complain because you, like we were just saying, are way busier than me.
For the next 18 dadays, anyway.
Right. Yeah, that's who's counting.
Yep.
So, in terms of just sort of the campaign itself, you had said you declared, or how does that process work? You put your name in relatively early, right?
Yes, I was the first person for any position in Loudoun to start putting their paperwork in for the 2019 election. So I formed my campaign committee and officially announced my campaign in February of last year, of 2018. Okay. And then once it hits the actual election year, January 2nd, you're allowed to start collecting petition signatures. So I got all the petition signatures I needed the first week of 2019, got those in by January 8th, and we've been off to the races ever since.
Been busy since.
Yep.
In terms of, this is a long and complicated process. What made you decide to declare when you did? Like you said, you're the first person to declare candidacy. What was the motivation to both enter the race, or maybe to do it as early as you did, or whatever? What are you doing?
I did get that question. Yeah. Especially some of the sitting school board members were, they're in past election cycles, it hasn't really gotten going until the summer of the election, and so they're kind of looking at me like I'm crazy. Like, why are you starting so early? What are you? Who's this crazy guy who's showing up 2 years ahead of time doing this? So my thought motivations were, number one, I've been involved in school advocacy for a while, but anything related to running for office or politics was completely new to me. So I wanted to put my name out there to kind of let people know who I was and what I was passionate about, why I was running, and just kind of build up as much support as I possibly could over the next 2 years.
Okay, so I guess we're doing this in a slightly different order than I've been asking them, but obviously starting early gives you both the time and the opportunity to shake more hands, to attend more meetings, your name is certainly out there and all that. What's your motivation to run? Sort of like what's the goal? Is it just you like to be involved in the community, or are there particular issues that matter to you? Like what's your motivation for this particular job?
Sure. So I'll start by kind of rewinding to when my family first moved to Loudoun in 2013. It was we moved from Prince William County. Okay. We lived in Woodbridge before that. And so we moved to Aldie in 2013, right before my daughter started kindergarten. And it was pretty soon after that, it was midway through her kindergarten year, that there was an enormous budget fight between the school board and the board of supervisors. There was a shortfall of about $40 million, just under $40 million. Right. And as a result, the school board proposed or considered closing 4 of Western Loudoun's community schools. Aldie Elementary, where my daughter went, Hamilton Elementary, Lincoln Elementary, and what was Hillsborough Elementary at the time. Right. And so that was my first time really paying attention to what the school board was doing and why they were making some of the decisions they were making. And got involved with the community. We spoke at public hearings and really garnered public support for keeping the schools open.
Are they still open?
3 of the 4 of them are.
Yeah.
Hillsborough Elementary, it did stay open that year, but they saw the writing on the wall.
Right.
Because they saw it being a fight every year, and they were pretty heavily under-enrolled. So the community of Hillsborough decided to put forward the application to change into a charter.
Okay. Yeah, I knew there was something changed with charters, but I didn't know which school it was.
And so they became Hillsborough Charter the year after.
So is that still chartered through Loudoun County?
It is a public school that's under the auspices and oversight of LCPS. So it's run through the Charter School Committee, and then there's a board of directors run by the community that oversees the school.
So they get a little more freedom. But
they get a little more freedom. Yeah. They get their funding from LCPS, and it's free for any LCPS student to attend.
Okay.
The same thing with the other charter, Middleburg Charter as well.
Right.
But back to the the question about why I decided to run. So that was the first time I really started getting involved, and then in 2015. The incumbent of the Blue Ridge seat, Jill Turgeon, no one challenged her for the seat. She won unopposed. And I felt like throughout that process and other things that I saw the school board do, I wasn't... There were some pretty significant things that I disagreed with.
Right.
And so I thought this time around, I'm not going to wait for someone else to put their hat into the ring and run, because as 2015 showed, there's no guarantee that anyone else at all will step up to run.
Right.
So that was one of the reasons why I decided to run, and also why I announced so early, to kind of stake my claim in the ground and say, well, I'm doing this. If you were thinking of doing it because no one else was doing it,
somebody already got it.
Someone's already got it. Yeah. It worked for a while, but then, ended up getting a post in the race.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's okay. So that's interesting. And I might have mentioned this. I don't remember if I did. I might have mentioned this in one of the other discussions, but I always feel like why a person runs, regardless of their position on issues, like, says a lot, and it's something that goes back to like Plato's Republic of like, a lot of times your best candidates are reluctant. I'm doing it because either no one else will, or because the only other people who will I do not or cannot trust. And so it's anytime you see a person, I was thinking about this when I'm watching like presidential debates on TV, anyone who looks like they're enjoying it too much, or there was no doubt that they were ever going to do it, even if I agree with them on everything, I don't know that I actually want to vote for them. Like, I like the person who seems to be doing it out of some sort of sense of duty or obligation.
Right.
You're sort of like, I'm doing it because I have to, or because no one else will. It gives me a better feeling, regardless of position.
There's an old quote: "People love trying to give power to those who don't want it."
Right.
Like
yeah. So it's a good spot to be in.
Yeah.
And so you start out sort of focusing on your daughter's situation in the schools. And it's funny, I've never actually connected it until you were just explaining that. I grew up in Pennsylvania. My elementary school class was 13 kids, and all of the grades were like 10 to 18 kids. And they
That's
fought.
The dream.
Yeah, but they fought all the time to like close it down. They kept it until I was probably in high school at some point, and they finally shut it down. But they held out as long as they could. And I think the argument was, we all say we want small class sizes. You have a place that does it, and it fits. But then you do the budget on the other side, and you say, well, but it's hard to justify the expense of the building.
Sure. And it was really interesting going back to that budget fight and listening to the some of the justifications and reasoning of the school board members, and it just seemed so disconnected from reality and what the community wanted.
Right.
The biggest elephant in the room was just the fact of how quickly enrollment in the schools had grown and has continued to grow.
Right.
And the fact that we have had schools, even over the last couple of years, that have been at 120% of capacity, like Buffalo Trail, Willard, Mercer, and a couple of other ones, and to take away seats that are available, even if they're elsewhere in the county, so it doesn't necessarily help. But to take it directly, but to take seats away that could be used while enrollment is growing and continues to grow.
Do you really want to consolidate when the other buildings are over capacity?
Right, and also when there were like you mentioned, there were you can't justify the cost of keeping the school if it's half full.
Right.
But when you really peeled back the onion, in some cases, it's very difficult to get per pupil pricing out of LCPS.
Right.
Not per pupil pricing, per pupil cost out of LCPS. But when you looked at it, in some cases, the per pupil cost of the small schools was on par or even less than some of their counterparts nearby.
Right.
And then when you peeled back the onion even further and said, they kept pointing to Middleburg Elementary and saying Middleburg Elementary, it costs 3 times as much to educate kids there than the rest of the county.
Right.
But the driving factor beyond that was the fact that you had a bunch of very senior teachers in a very small school.
Right.
So it completely, it's like putting your thumb on the scale. It completely skews what you're looking at. Whereas if you had those senior teachers diluted among a larger school staff population, it wouldn't stick out nearly as much.
Right, and that's something that actually I've talked with a couple of friends at work or other teachers who, if you look at it, say like Woodgrove compared to Parkview, Woodgrove ends up, looking, their staffing cost is way higher, but the average experience of the teachers is so much higher.
The average teacher tenure.
And so you're paying people more because they have more experience. So when you look at like the per pupil cost, it really what you're looking at is where do you have the most senior staff sort of consolidated, and then the question is that okay, or not that anybody ever wants to be reassigned, but does it make sense, both either from a cost issue or just for distributing experienced teachers? Do you move people? And I say this as a teacher who doesn't want to be moved and has also been moved once in the past. You don't love that situation, but I mean, in a logistical sense, both for cost, but also for evening out quality of instruction, you start having to have that discussion of, if this little school costs that much more, but the reason is the staff, are we either we're okay with it, or do we want to even that out and move people around? And, your staff is unhappy, but the students might be happy, parents might be happy.
Right. And there's certainly situations in which you want to look at the cost of the school and find ways to drive it down. No one wants to waste money or spend money unnecessarily. Right. But I feel like, just in a lot of respects, the emphasis on data and peeling back that onion and finding out what the true numbers are, and whether correlation is equal to causality in that case is the case, or whether it's just unrelated. Yeah,
and it probably, like, the way people look at it probably has a lot to do with their own education. Like I said, I'd never connected, I went to a small elementary school, like by far the smallest in the district where I grew up. But probably someone's own experience in a big school or a small school probably changes how much you like or dislike the idea of that. So, like, for you, we'll do the school question.
What a great segue.
Yeah, right. Well, I started to say it earlier. I was like, I'll hang on to that. But for you, like, what was your experience in school, both thinking, say, through school, middle school, high school, college? What did you study? Did you like school, not like school? I mean, what was your experience?
Sure. So I grew up in New York on Long Island, and I went to I stayed there my entire primary and secondary schooling, and it was the Jericho School District, one of the very best public school districts in the United States. I don't know if it's still the case, but I know the last time I looked on, I can't remember if it was niche or great schools, it was number one on the list.
Great.
So it was a rather unique public school experience, but a great one. So it was my elementary school was fairly small. It was 3 classes per grade. So somewhere in between the tiny ones that we have in Western Loudoun, and then the 8 or 9 classes per grade that we have in the rest of Loudoun.
Right.
So we had 2 elementary schools, 1 middle school, 1 high school. Right. That was the entire school district.
Yeah, so in New York, they do districts, not counties, right?
Yeah.
So that's, in Pennsylvania, it was the same thing. We had 5 elementary schools, 1 middle school, 1 high school.
Yep.
And so when I first started teaching in Virginia, like, the way we set up, and there's so many high schools, we're always adding, like, it took me, I probably worked here for 2 or 3 years before I, like, really felt like I understood the system I was in. It's so different. Do you feel like your experience in high school was a positive one? And I say high school just because that's the point at which people start thinking, am I using school? You know what I mean? Like, elementary school is a lot about how you feel, you're connected to your community. I mean, not that you're not learning, we should be learning a lot, but somewhere in high school is when most people sort of gain the awareness of what they're doing or why they're doing it. Do you think high school was as positive an experience as, say, the elementary school was where you were at?
I would say pretty equal.
Yeah.
It was an outstanding school experience from kindergarten through 12th grade.
Right.
As far as what the opportunities were, what they offered. I feel like being a small school district allowed them to be very nimble, where you really could focus on each kid's needs, rather than teaching to the middle or just focusing on what the biggest clump of students needed. So they had such an amazing amount of freedom because it's not, they didn't have 18 high schools to deal with.
18 high schools, 18 principals, all the
right. So it was just, if you wanted to, I was reading above grade level, so I remember my first grade teacher just said, we're going to get you better books to read. So she took me into the teacher storage closet, and where they had, every book that they didn't normally give or wasn't in active circulation, and just said, giving you a stack of 40 books to read so that you don't bother me for books for the few months.
And that's both the sign of a teacher who's paying attention, which is good. It's also a sign of a teacher who has a number of kids they can manage, that they both could notice and could do something quickly about it.
Exactly.
And being in a smaller system, I think, like you said, you used the word, I think, nimble, right? It's one of the things that, I go back and forth because my family, we live in Clark County, but one high school for the whole county, one middle school, two elementary schools
in Clark.
Yeah, in Clark.
Okay.
So I mean, it's one of the smallest counties in the state, and it's But I think of that in terms of school system, and say as a teacher who works in a much bigger system, I think about like my kids, not yet, but almost approaching school age, and I just think, man, if you wanted to do something. Anything, do something different, or institute a program, or whatever. Like that's a place where it can happen much easier. Now the funding isn't always there, but the number of sort of hoops to jump through, or the number of cogs in the wheel, like it's so much more streamlined. I think nimble is probably a very good word for it. Like if you want to act, you can. And bigger systems, everything goes slower.
In general, yeah.
For college, what did you do, or I assume you went to college. What did you do after high school?
Yes, after high school, I went to the University of Illinois. Okay. I studied computer science, graduated with a bachelor's in that, and then I started working I interned with Lockheed Martin during college, and then started working with them as a software developer full-time after college, and then got my master's degree part-time on the side from Johns Hopkins while I was working.
Okay.
So I got my master's in information systems and technology from Johns Hopkins over a couple of years.
All right. Did you enjoy? Some people will go to college and love it, and some people go to college as like a necessary evil. Did you enjoy college?
Yes. I enjoyed college. It was a fantastic school for engineering. I used a lot of what I learned, not every class and not in every way, but I feel like I did use a lot of what I learned, particularly with algorithms, and not the kind of nuts and bolts of learning how to program, because that I had kind of taught myself or learned on the side or gotten during internships.
Right.
But U of I had a very research focus. So learning about the theory behind computer science, about why you want to optimize running times, about why you want to optimize the user interface so that people can access it better.
Right.
That was very useful and something I enjoyed.
Awesome. Yeah.
I didn't particularly enjoy the Midwest itself.
Right.
So that was my 4 years out in the Midwest, and then after I graduated from college, I kind of ran back to the East Coast and ended up in the Maryland and Virginia area. Okay.
Yeah, I know. And I do a decent amount of tutoring, outside of school, and working on college admissions essays and prep for interviews and things like that. I've worked with a few kids who have applied, and everybody sort of loves University of Illinois, and it's funny because before I got into tutoring and doing that, I didn't really know anything about the school. And now, based on the little bit of research I've done helping kids, but the way they talk about, like, it strikes me as one of the better schools for computer science, for that engineering. Yeah. And so that's where academically you find yourself in the right place. Johns Hopkins is a great school. What do you do now?
So as I mentioned, I started as a software developer. I kind of quickly, kind of against my will at first, became a project lead and a project manager, and then discovered that I was pretty good at it and enjoyed it. So I kind of made my way up the ranks in technical project management.
Okay.
So for the last 9 years, I've been the director of IT services for a small government contractor called PDRI. Okay. The company as a whole does human capital consulting. So more or less, they try to help the HR departments of the government agencies and big commercial firms do their jobs better, hire better people, figure out who to promote, do better performance management. Okay. And on the IT side of the house, we develop software systems that supports that or implements it. So our biggest products are selection systems used within the government. So if you apply for a federal job and applying for that job requires you to take a assessment or test as part of that hiring process, then you may get redirected to one of our systems to take those tests online, either on your computer, either unproctored in the comfort of your home or in a proctored testing center.
Awesome. Yeah. So you're using a lot of what you did in school.
I am. Yes, right. I am.
I feel like, that goes either way, because I think the statistics, somewhere around 62% of people with a college degree have a job where they basically don't use their degree. And I teach English, I majored in, I obviously use my degree, but you think so many people don't. And so as I'm having these conversations, it's interesting to hear either how many people have a job that, they say, I wouldn't have gotten it if I hadn't gone to school, but I don't use school, so you're a guy, you're using it.
I think I'm one of the rare people who kind of knew what I wanted to do from a very early age, or until about 4th or 5th grade, I wanted to be an astronaut, and that didn't work out too well for me. But
it's good. It's a good goal.
It was lofty. I failed in that goal. I will say.
I had a friend growing up who wanted to be an astronaut, and it was probably junior year of high school, and the guy still hadn't passed Algebra 1. We had to sit down with him at lunch one day, and we're like, look, it's not just you're not just sitting on a rocket, like you need to do a lot of math. And he's like, I'll figure it out. And it was like, buddy,
maybe you could work ground support.
Yeah. There's like something else. We were trying to be good friends, but at the same it's not happening.
Right. Well, anyway, after I pivoted away from that and figured, if I can't even throw a baseball straight, it's unlikely I'm going to become an astronaut.
Right.
I really got involved in. Taught myself how to program in BASIC on my old Apple II C++, and really enjoyed doing that, and knew I wanted to do something related to writing software. For a long time, I thought I was going to go into game development, and then after learning more about that industry, mostly during college, I kind of went away from that a little bit, but still knew I wanted to get involved in software development.
So, in terms of school, did either in your experience in school or thinking about maybe your kids' experience in schools now, did your school or do their school support that kind of learning? I mean, there's like the International Day of Code, and there are now probably a dozen solid websites where kids can play and sort of learn coding on their own. But I don't know how many schools actually use it. Those resources are there, but is that something either that you've had support with, or do you know if your kids have contact with in school?
So at least for me, we were immersed in, this is one of the things that made it a really good school district. We were immersed in computers and technology almost from day one. We were the pilot program in something called Writing to Read. I don't know if you've heard of it. I think it was underwritten by IBM, and so our principal got involved and got a grant from that, and so it was like learning how to read and learning how to spell and doing a lot of other things through computers when, most other school districts in the country didn't even have a single classroom computer at the time, or may not have.
Yeah.
So that was being exposed to it at such an early age. I remember one of my very first experiences was, kindergarten, pressing a key on the keyboard and then seeing the cursor, seeing the letter show up on the monitor, and just being really fascinated and trying to figure out I would try to find the letter as it was going through the wire and understand why that was happening.
Right.
So I think I was really lucky in having a really good support system and kind of really good off the beaten path types of opportunities that weren't always available to others at the time.
I mean, access, I think, is important. That's I want to say it's in Outliers, Malcolm Gladwell's book, but he talks about Bill Gates and how his situation, he's a brilliant guy, and he's probably going to do great anyway, but he, by both a little bit of luck and a little bit of influence of the parents in the community, it was one of the first schools in, I forget where he grew up, it was Washington or Northern California or something, where they had a full computer lab. So this kid has access to computers before most schools even had one in the classroom, and essentially gives you the access, which creates a head start. Not that everyone in the school ends up being Bill Gates or even works in the industry, but you think about what an advantage it is to have the opportunity, the access to it.
The privilege.
Yes,
absolutely.
And so, this is something that I talked about several years ago. I did a program called, it was through George Washington University, called Teachers in Industry. And I don't know if we still do it. It used to be like a summer internship program for teachers.
Yeah.
And you basically spend 3 weeks to get farmed out to businesses and all this stuff. And one of the things that at two different places I was at, they talked about was how important it is to have access to technology when you're young, and not just to play a game, to let the kids start to learn how to manipulate, some programs, whatever. But they floated the idea, and I've always thought this is good, of offering coding classes as a foreign language credit. And it's like, and it's tricky because I'm like, in a traditional academic sense, I'm like, there's a lot of value in a foreign language. But I think like, there's a lot of job opportunity in it. And so I don't know if I like the substitution, but I just thought like, that's at least a way to get more of it in schools. Because I don't know that we do a lot of that. I don't know if we do a lot of coding and that.
I have mixed thoughts about that, just specifically about offering it as a foreign language credit, because it's basically two different sides of your brain where, you know, people think they're very similar and they're very much not.
Right.
Where I'm really a case in point in that, where I was, you know, I was always had pretty high aptitude in being able to pick up programming languages, but for like foreign language, you know, when I had to study French in middle school and high school, it was by far my weakest subject.
So me too. French was by far my worst. French and chemistry.
French and chemistry.
I was good at everything except French and chemistry.
Right. So I certainly wouldn't want to replace foreign languages with foreign languages with coding. Right. However, I do think that the pilot program we have now, where we have the 3 computer science immersion schools in elementary, is to a person, every single parent I talk to who has kids who are at Round Hill or the other 2 elementary schools that are participating in that has said that it's absolutely done wonders for their children, and something I think is a success story behind something LCPS has tried out in the last few years.
And sort of given that opportunity. I mean, with that, and I'm going to ask a bad question just because I don't really know exactly what I'm asking, but
okay.
that idea of like creating some specialized programs, like we have
specialized program. Okay.
Well, specialized, like thinking like, you know, we have, say an immersion program like that, or we think about the Academy of Science or AET, you know, we have these sorts of things. And I think that students who are involved in those programs tend to get a lot out of them, seem to really enjoy them. Whether you respond as a parent or a school board candidate or both, or, you know, whatever, like, do you think that's a thing we should do more of? Like, basically giving kids access to the things that they have interest in, or that the family values, as opposed to sort of your standard everybody goes to the same 5 core classes kind of thing.
And I think there is some danger in overdoing it and turning every school into a boutique or something like that. So that being said, I think it's really interesting because on one hand, I believe pretty strongly that, you know, when you have standards and you have policies, you really need to, I'm going to use Brenda Sheridan's word, and equitably implement that across all school, you know, all schools, and make sure that all schools are implementing what the standards are in the same way. However, at the same time, I really believe that we need to do a better job of fostering innovation and trying new things in the school district. So if a principal or a school community comes and says, we want to experiment with having, you know, instead of a computer science immersion school, we want to be a fine arts, you know, experiment with being a fine arts design school, or doing foreign language immersion, or doing a year-round schedule might be tough to implement just on one school.
Logistically, but as an idea,
I really want to give schools more flexibility to try new things, as long as there are specific goals in mind, and what they do can be measurable, so that we can come back either a year later or 2 years later and figure out whether it actually worked or not. And if it didn't work, okay, we can cut bait. And if it did work, then we start talking about whether it makes sense to roll that out, to expand it. Because I don't think you can, other than seeing what other school districts do and waiting for them to innovate and try new things, I don't think you have a good way of really driving the school district forward, or more progressing it in a comprehensive way, unless you're willing to be bold and let schools experiment with what they're going to do.
And I mean, I think, you know, you have to have faith in the administrators in the school and the staff, but I mean, I would tend to agree, and I guess I'll sort of say it from the other side, is that you know, I think the rate of change in the classrooms over the last few years has increased, and in some ways that's good. In some ways, as a teacher, it's tough because right about the time I start to figure out a new thing, we get another new thing. And so sometimes I feel like, you know, and I'm at least decent at what I do. Like, I think there are better teachers out there, but I'm pretty good. and I try to play along. Sometimes, and I feel like more recently in my career, things move quick so that I'm just getting good at something, and all of a sudden we're changing it or we're doing more, and it's like you got to give a chance to figure it out, or we implement a change and it's sort of everybody's going to do the thing. And sometimes I feel like either you need a school to pilot it, or you need everyone to do it except a couple of schools, so you have something to compare back to.
You have a control group.
Yeah. We need something for comparison purposes. And I don't know how you feel if you're in the school that has to do it or not have to do it, but like purposeful change is good.
Yeah.
But sometimes change is just change, and it's hard to tell the difference sometimes.
And I'm gonna put words in your mouth a little bit, so feel free to push back on this. But I think some of the disenfranchisement you might be feeling is because a lot of it has been dictated to you, as opposed to teachers and even school administration being partners or leading that change.
Right.
And I think if it's just being dictated from the top down, then it has a much lower
success rate. Yeah.
It's almost doomed to fail if it doesn't have the buy-in of the teachers. Right.
And that's just as an easy example, we've really increased the kind of software we have access to now that we're 1-to-1. The kids all have Chromebooks, at least in my school, and the rest of the county's this year, next year.
Did you guys get them this year or last year?
I'm trying to think. I think it was last year.
In phase 1? Okay.
Yeah, last year. And I probably, better with it this year because I've had a chance to adapt and practice. It's sort of, there's a little learning curve there and figuring out how to use these things appropriately, consistently. But I think, giving access to new technology in the classroom is great. I just always feel like I want to, use a toolbox metaphor. Like if I get a new tool in my toolbox, that's great. I need to figure out how to use it well and then do it. I also need to not always use that tool, and not that anyone's necessarily forcing it, but I think sometimes in the rollout of anything new, people get excited about new things, and all you talk about is a new thing,
right.
And it's like, it's a tool, and it's a means to an end. It's not the end itself.
But it's not the hammer for every nail.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes you have to be able to pick and choose a little bit.
So how much advanced warning I'm just out of curiosity on my part, how much advanced warning did you get that the Chromebooks were coming, and what kind of discussions did you guys have on the school level about how you guys were going to implement that? Or on the team level?
There was, it's hard to remember. There were rumbles about it for a while. There was a lot of talk that it may be coming. And then probably, I want to say it was the school year before. So if we had them last year, that was 2018, 2019. Mm-hmm. So probably somewhere in the middle of 2017, 2018 is when it started sounding like this was happening. And our principal said, it sounds like this is coming. And he just sort of tossed it out sort of casually in a faculty meeting. It's like, it's probably one of those things, if it's going to happen, we probably just want to get in and figure it out. Which to me, I'm listening to the meeting, I say, it sounds like we're going to be early in this if he has any say in it, which is probably smart. If it's going to happen, maybe you just get in there and figure out what you're going to do, get ahead of the curve a little bit. But it was probably somewhere, in the middle of the school year before, but it was pretty close to the end of the year before we knew for sure. Teachers were given... We got the teacher laptops, and some schools had already done that. So, but at Broad Run where I teach, we first each teacher got their own laptop, probably in the last week or two of school, the year before kids got the Chromebook. So it was like, here's a
school year, but the end of the school
so
year.
In June, and we came back in August, and the kids had Chromebooks.
And you're not there over the summer.
So it's yours. You take it with you. You play with it, figure it out or not. And so some people use it over the summer, and some people came back and were like, so what's this about?
Right.
Which I don't think is a terrible way to do it. But, there was a lot of diverse sort of experience with it because you have people who are either quicker to grasp it or not. But yeah, we had some warning, but even you could have told me 2 years in advance. And for the first year of that, I just went, whatever, I'll deal with it later. And as it gets closer, you start trying to adapt a little bit.
Sure.
That's why I say I feel like it's going better in my classroom. I can't speak for anyone else, but it's going better in the second year than went in the first because I've got to figure it out. I've got to tweak some things. So if we continue on this path, give me another year or two, and we're going to be cruising. This is going to be no problem. My concern is sometimes when we change a thing and then we change it again before I had a chance to get good at it. Like, I don't like being bad at stuff. If I'm going to be bad at it, I'm either going to not do it or I've put a lot of effort to get good. And so sometimes I personally try to look and say, what are the odds this is a long-term decision? And if the odds are good, I jump in wholeheartedly because I need to do. And if I say, I think someone's going to change their mind, then I try to very respectfully play along slowly. I don't want to overinvest.
The old rule of wait till someone asks you 3 times to make sure that they're serious.
And it's not out of resistance. It's just I feel like you got to be careful that you're not putting too much time into any one thing.
You know? I will say I took part in the Loudoun Education Association Educator for a Day program. And I think it was just about a year ago, last November. And so I was in a 3rd grade classroom in Creighton's Corner. So basically team taught with the regular classroom teacher for the day. And so we did a bunch of general classroom stuff. I read some stories to the kids, and then I had prepared a very introductory coding lesson for them. And when I said, all right, kids, get out your Chromebooks, instead of put away your Chromebooks, they were super excited by that and were completely locked in and enjoyed that. So I think it's a tremendous tool to have in the classroom. It can be used as a force for good, but it definitely has to be done in a thoughtful way, and with enough time given to teachers to figure out how they're going to use it, and enough time to let them figure out how to implement it.
And that I think you got to have the right tools and right people. In terms of rolling things out, you sort of talked about you use the technology and the kids get excited, and some teachers are quick to do it, and some are going to be slower. And I think in some cases this comes to both sort of appropriate training with the tools and a little bit of professionalism, both expected from and given to staff. We need to expect you're going to respond well and do your best to play along and use the tools well. And then there's probably got to be a little bit of trust to let people do it. And every principal handles that differently. I think that creates like different environments school to school. But say, with staffing or with use of technology, with things like that. So we'll do one, think about if you were given a school and maybe even think of it as like a private school setting. So regardless of sort of legislation, you have a school, you have a building, you have a budget, you have a student body. And you can do anything you want in that school. You could be a nature school, you could be year round, you could keep them there, it would be a boarding school, whatever. In your mind, what is the ideal school? Like, what would you do with your school if you had that opportunity?
Oh, it would be exactly the same as we have now, except we wouldn't celebrate Columbus Day. I'm joking. I'm joking. I think we touched on it a little bit already because I gave some thought to the question, and there's so many different ways you could go. Like if you go to a year-round schedule like Middleburg Charter is that better? Is that worse? Or is it just different? Right. If you have STEM as a elective like Hillsborough Charter does, is that better, worse, or just different?
Right.
If you do computer science immersion, if you do foreign language immersion, there's so many different ways that you can go that what I would say, not for a specific school, but for the school district as a whole, I'd just really like to see each school almost be an experiment by design.
Right.
Where you're trying something out, you're trying to move education forward. Right. You're trying to find the most optimal way of educating the kids at that school, making sure that not only at a school level, but even to an individual student level, you're taking each student and giving them as perfect of a year of growth as you possibly could. So I would almost, from a macro school district level, I would love to be able to go visit all 94 schools in the county, and for each of them to have a unique story to tell about the things that they're trying at that school. Like we talked about before, how they're measuring success, what they're hoping to achieve by it, and what they hope to be able to bring back and roll out to a wider population if it succeeds.
Okay. And I think choice is really important. And I think, choice sort of goes two ways. Either you can choose, say, within the classroom where the teacher presents one lesson or this is what we're doing, and then the students get to choose, say, the book they're reading or the product they create. or which is in some classes, in some settings, I think it's very good, and it's also sometimes difficult to manage well because you got a lot of different things happening in one room. Or
you could have 28 kids doing
28 different things, and it's hard to provide support for it, but you never want to limit the kids' opportunities if you can. The other sort of way you think about it is almost more like college setting, where the kids have more choice in the kinds of classes they take, but when you're in the class, you're sort of doing that class. And I mean, there's a million probably other ways to create that individual experience for kids, but it's probably like working from a system we're in now to something that focuses more on like the individual student. You got to give the kids or their parents or the combination some sway, some influence in it. And I don't know how you, like if you were, say, to move to more of like a magnet school or, sort of specialized programs, if people get to apply for and go to those schools, that creates that opportunity. You get to do what you're into. And I think, and I'm thinking about in the high school level, you just see a lot of kids who have a lot of interests sitting in a lot of classes they're not interested in.
Right.
And it's a tough spot because it's not that what you're doing in class isn't important, but it's not important to that kid, or at least in that moment. And the kid doesn't have any way out, and the teacher doesn't have any way to help them out sometimes. It's like, we just got to make this as bearable as we can. And I think that's, anytime I feel like I'm trying to make something more bearable, I just think that I'm probably doing the wrong thing in the first place. So,
and that's, I think you're getting to a little bit what you also talked about before about, the Academies of Loudoun and some of the programs there, where, one of the things I would really like to do is find ways to take a lot of those programs back to the home schools, so that, there's for sure more than 40 kids in the county who are interested in horticulture or biotechnology programs. Right. There's only, I think, what are we up to? 120 seats in the Academies of Science. I think for the really specialized programs, when it requires technology or infrastructure that it doesn't make sense to roll out to every school, like you don't want every school to have a car garage, right? It totally makes sense for that to be restricted to the academies, where you're going to invest in one great facility to do that.
We need a lot of technology,
Right. Or, the print shop that they have there that's, state of the art. You probably don't know, unless you're just, rolling in money, you may not want to invest in putting that into every school. Right. But there are a lot of courses in the course catalog that I think you can take back and to create more opportunities for kids. Yeah. And I think we're both saying the same thing in different ways, just providing those opportunities so that, it's not, you have to recognize that it's not college, and you have to provide more structure than you do at that level. Right. While at the same time trying to let kids explore and find out what they're passionate about.
Yeah, I mean, I think, between 2 and 3, I say it's 2.5. I don't know the exact number, but, if you look at the average undergraduate experience, the average is 2.5 major changes while you're in school.
In college?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Like 2.5, and it might actually be a little bit higher than that now. That number is probably about 2 years old. And so I never changed my major. I was English. I just kept adding minors. Like I added secondary ed, I added anthropology. I would have added another one, but I didn't want to stay longer. But so I mean, so you got to think some people are changing the major 5 and 6 times to get your average up close to 2.5 to 3.
Now that you mention it, I think if you average mine and my wife's major changes together, you probably come out at average, because I didn't change mine, and I know that she changed a bunch
several
of times. So it's interesting.
And if that's just because you're curious and you're interested and you're learning new things, you say, "Oh no, there's a new thing." That's great. I think for a lot of people that just comes out of starting school and not knowing what you wanted to do. Yeah. And then you're trying to figure it out. And not that high school needs to be college or do any of that, but some of the things you're talking about, like taking some of those specialized programs or having those opportunities, would help at least some, if not all. It would certainly help more people find what they're into or find what they're not into. But you can certainly learn that a lot cheaper in high school than 2 years into an undergraduate degree.
And there's a story I've told a couple times where there were 2 kids who I went to high school with who were, what's the polite way that I can put it? They were ne'er-do-wells. And one of them, we had an outstanding vocational apprenticeship program. And so one of them took an apprenticeship at a local restaurant and found out that he really enjoyed cooking and went on to become a professional chef. Right. And the other started writing for the school newspaper as part of a vocational class. Right. Discovered he really enjoyed doing that, and ended up writing for the Jericho Tribune for our hometown paper. Yeah. So unless you're providing, a lot of school, no matter how well intentioned you are, a lot of school is necessarily just kind of throwing the kitchen sink at kids and seeing what sticks. Right. And I just think the more different things you can throw at them, the better.
Yeah, and I go back and forth. So I said earlier, I don't remember if we were recording it or not, and I said I didn't mean this in an offensive way, but I said I don't know a lot about like your background, and one of the reasons is, one, I don't live in the county, so I'm not voting, but two, since I'm going to have the conversation, the goal is to keep it broad, so I don't want to ask anything like real targeted and picky. But the one thing I know, just because I've seen it on your Facebook feed, is that you love recess. That's the one thing that I know. But I think
the message is out. Okay.
But I think it's really important. But I also think that like some of what we're talking about in terms of like creating a little bit more freedom, or even if it's not necessarily freedom, but sort of more opportunity. Some of what you do with recess in elementary, learning through play and doing the rest, are probably things that in the high school level, you start thinking about what you just said with like a vocational placement or an internship or things like that. Not that, and we don't have to spend a bunch of time on it, but what was your starting interest in the recess issue?
Sure.
Because I think it probably relates to some of the other stuff we just talked about, is my guess.
Right. So a couple of years ago, it was right around when my son was in first grade, and he was coming home from school and doing flips on the couch for an hour. Because he was only getting 15 minutes of recess at school.
For the whole day?
For the whole day.
Wow.
And it was, full day, first grade, 6 hours, 45 minutes in school.
So when you were in school, I think I got 3:15 or 3:20-minute recesses.
Yeah.
Plus a gym class in there somewhere. Mm-hmm. Did you have more, like I said, we had 3, I think 15.
We had one big recess that was right after lunch.
Okay.
So we would eat and then go outside. I can't tell you offhand how long it was. It felt at the time like it was 2 hours long.
Yeah.
It was probably half an hour, 40 minutes, something like that. Yeah. But it was, and that was reasonable.
Yeah.
And, the pendulum swings every 20 years or so in education. And so 20 years ago, it was No Child Left Behind, and, the big push on standardized testing and maximizing instructional time in the classroom to the exclusion of all other things. And just like anything else, there has to be a balance, especially with young kids. There is so much research that shows that the way kids learn, young children, is through play. And without providing those opportunities throughout the school day for kids to get their energy out. And I did a great demonstration that isn't going to come out great in podcast form because it's visual, but there's a great demonstration that we used in our advocacy group that showed we had a stack of solo cups, and each cup represents one unit of learning. And so throughout the school day, you're just handing more and more cups to kids.
Right.
And so if you just sit the kid in the classroom for hours at the time, you're going to keep giving them more cups, and they're going to struggle to hold them and figure out how to balance them on their head or whatever.
Right.
But then when you let them play, when you give them a break and let them cognitively process, that's when they can stack their cups together.
Okay. So you're literally handing them faster than you can stack them. I'm just cradling. And...
Yeah. If you go to my Facebook page, you can find the video of me doing it at the school board meeting last year. Nice. So that's when it's a really good visual because it's pretty accurate for what happens cognitively.
You need some time
to need some time to stack your cups. You need some time to process what you've learned, to rest physically, and come back to the classroom ready to learn more. So I started getting involved, and really, it was a coincidence at first where I found out a good friend of mine who we knew from the children's swim team was taking a leadership role in this group called More Recess for Virginians, and I asked how I could get involved in that after seeing what was going on with my kids, and we worked to get a new state law passed on recess. It was House Bill 1419. And it was a really interesting process. It was sort of like the old Schoolhouse Rock You know,
right, okay,
how does a bill become a law?
Yeah, I'm just a bill on Capitol
I'm just
Hill.
a bill on Capitol Hill. So it was fascinating and to go through that process and, you know, see how the sausage is made and kind of what happens behind the scenes. And even though it was, no one wants to be against recess, right?
Right.
Broadly speaking.
Right.
So even though it was, you know, very bipartisan and relatively non-controversial, the language of the bill did change or threaten to change several times through the process. Right. But it was really interesting. I couldn't travel down to Richmond all that much for it because I was still working a full-time job. But I worked behind the scenes a lot, working with the legislative aides for the Loudoun delegation. Right. From everyone from Jennifer Wexton, when she was a state senator at the time, to Dave LaRock on the complete opposite political side of things. Right. And that was a good day when we were able to get that passed.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And then, but the really interesting part is that because they didn't want to be too restrictive in what they were doing, it gave the school districts more flexibility in what to do, but didn't actually mandate that they do anything. The extent of the state law is 2 short paragraphs that slightly cuts the amount of instructional time per year that's required to be spent on the 4 core subjects. And also allows about 15% of the school day, or about 55 minutes, to count unstructured breaks towards instructional time. Okay. So, because prior to that, school districts would say, we've got so much to do, if we can't count it as instructional time, we can't do it. We can't provide more than 15 minutes of recess. Right. So that took that excuse away from the districts. So now you can count this
towards your
hours
for the year.
The first 55 minutes per day.
Right.
So as long as you're not providing 3 hours of recess per day, you can count it as instructional time. But then we still had to come back to the school district level. And so I took the lead for Loudoun County in holding town halls and community meetings, and then working with school board members to figure out what would work and get them to put an actual policy in place that affected kids.
Right. So you decide how you're going to implement. So now, how much recess time does your son get?
40, at least half an hour per day.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was the policy that we put in place for Loudoun requires at least 40 minutes for kindergarten and 30 minutes for grades 1 through 5, preferably split into 2 blocks if possible. So you get like a morning break and an afternoon break. Yeah. And the other really part of the policy that I'm really proud about is that it prohibits being able to take recess away for kids as a disciplinary measure. Right. Where, there were so many stories we heard about, oh, you were misbehaving, so I'm taking recess away, or, you're behind in math, so you got to stay in the classroom to do extra math. Right. And that may have a short-term benefit that day. Yeah. But the research is pretty clear that in the long run, it leads to worse results and effects. Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's actually, my oldest child is 3, but it's one of the things we love about the daycare they go to. It's in-home, but very much run like a school. That the teacher does like a lesson in the morning. They get in, they do like read a little book. There's a lesson, there's like a little worksheet, and they work on letters or numbers. And it's kids from, 3 months through about 5 years old. And so she sort of has, there's basically 2 things happening. She sort of differentiates in halves, which, whatever, it's good enough. But then there's a lot of playtime. So he has the practice of knowing, I can sit down. This is how I'm going to do this worksheet. But then, he spends 3 times that much time playing for. And I'm like, that's, especially when you're really young, I think that's an effective. So is it balance. Montessori? It kind of sounds like Montessori. I don't know how she would describe it, but the kids there's a couple, they can sort of play with whatever in certain areas. But during the lesson, everybody's doing the lesson. Everyone does this thing, but it's not very long, and they're very young kids. And in talking with a friend of mine, in fact, actually, I might have been talking with Jim Dunning on a previous podcast. He said, "Well, why does the kid need to sit there?" And I said, "Well, it's important to learn. You got to learn to pay attention. It's good to know how to color inside the lines. It's good to know that you don't always have to do that too. But there are some good things that come from structuring your day." But especially when you're young, a lot of the things you learn, especially a lot of your social interactions, probably work best with less adult interference, or at least, with more, student-led activity. Go out and play, go play some kickball, run around. I know that a lot of principals schedule PE for like freshman boys
first block of the day.
Get their
you get it, you do it, or first or second block, you get them into school, and then you do, and I think strategically it makes sense, but it probably yields some other benefits too.
I've knocked on a lot of doors this campaign, but the best door I knocked on was a guy opened the door and he happened to have 3 or 4 kids sitting in the living room watching something, and so he started talking to me, and I mentioned the recess thing and what we did, and he just looked behind him and said, "Kids, it's the guy that got you more recess." And all the kids behind him are going, "Yay!"
You're like, yeah, that's
so
right.
I came away from that door feeling like a king. So, but
that's good.
It was a nice moment.
So, do you think that like applies to older kids? Like in high schools now, we're doing like a little bit of like a break time kind of thing. Like kids get, and I think each school's probably doing it differently. I don't know a lot about the policy piece of it, like where that came from. But so you go and you do first block, and then kids get, I think it's 15 minutes, 10-15 minutes. Take a walk, go talk to a teacher, do whatever you want. And when we first rolled it out, I teach public speaking as an elective, and so last year their persuasive assignment, make school better. And they said, "What do you mean?" I said, anything you want. And I was amazed. The 2 most common answers were kids asked that teachers help them stay off their phones, which I was like, well, that's weird, but it's like they recognize that they're distracted. And think about how many times in a day you're like looking at your phone, you're like, oh yeah, what am I doing? I shouldn't.
What's it doing in my hand?
Kids basically gave speeches saying like, I'd love if somebody helped me to not do that more. But a lot of kids said 15 minutes to take a break, go for a walk, and unrelated to their speech. I mean, it didn't leave the classroom, but now we're doing it. And so when it was first sort of rolled out, I think I was less surprised than a lot of other people in the room, just because I had just heard all these kids say they wanted it. And it's not an I thought it was going to be a bigger interruption, but like, do you think that serves a similar purpose for older students?
Yes, absolutely. So is that, before I answer, was that new this school year that you were
So at my school, yeah, I know
Yep.
a couple schools piloted or tested some stuff last year, and there was varying feelings about it, but my experience has been good so far.
So that's really good to hear. Yeah. So after we got the elementary recess policy put in place about a year and a half ago, the first question I got from a lot of parents was, "That's great. When are you going to do something about middle school?"
Right.
Because kids go, you go to middle school and everything changes.
Yeah.
I think in a lot of respects, the transition between middle school and high school is less severe. But because you're already on a block schedule, you're already used to going to different classrooms. It's certainly different, but less different than going from elementary to middle.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you lose your half an hour of recess. You lose all that you had. So over the last 9 months, since January, we've been working with the curriculum and instruction committee of the school board, and they ruminated on it for a while and worked a lot with staff and principals to figure out what was feasible and what was possible.
Right.
But the way we started the conversation with them, we started the conversation in 2 different ways. One, by saying the same research that we used last year by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the American Academy of Pediatrics, Shape America, and others. If you go back and look at the recommendations, they equally and explicitly apply to older children and adolescents as to younger children. Not to the same extent. It's kind of a sliding scale where no one is suggesting that high schoolers need 40 minutes of recess a day.
Right.
But the need for unstructured breaks, the need to catch your breath, doesn't magically go away when you turn 11 and go to middle school. Yeah. And so we wanted to try and do something about that. So we got it out of the curriculum and instruction committee in September, and the school board actually unanimously passed a secondary school unstructured break policy about 2 weeks ago now.
Okay. So it wasn't universal when we started it. So
Right.
That's sometimes I pay close attention, I know, and sometimes in this one I just I rolled it out and we said, all right.
I didn't loop back to the second prong. So the first was the research and how it applied to older children. The second is that some schools in Loudoun were already experimenting with programs.
Right.
The one we showcased the most, because they had the most progressive one, was Trailside Middle, which they call it pack time. There's a stigma against calling it recess at the upper grade level. Right. So Trailside calls it pack time. Belmont Ridge calls it, I'm confused, but like outdoor cafe, fresh air club, things like that. So Trailside was already providing 14 minutes a day after lunch where kids could go outside, take a breather, go talk to a principal or, go talk to a teacher or someone if they wanted to unwind and just kind of get their energy out and take a breath.
Right.
So we said, look, there's some schools already doing this. Let's eliminate the disparity. If you can do it in one school, you can do it in all of them. There's no reason why, for experimentation is great, but there's no reason why, one school is providing a break for kids and other isn't.
And that's also where, like we had talked about before, though, I think sort of rolling things out that way is good, because if at the end of the year you look and you go, well, the school, say without the breaks, has a, 8% more kids are going to pass their SOLs or whatever, then you can say, okay, well, that's not good. Or you say, and I think especially for the lower grades, I don't have any data. This is just my hunch. Mm-hmm. My guess is that if kids feel better throughout the day and they have that time, you probably see better results from the kid who gets the free time at recess than the kid who doesn't. And that's just purely just a guess, but I think that would make sense. But by doing it in that way, a few schools do it and a few schools don't. It gives you something to look at. First, does it work? Can we manage it? If it works there, it can work somewhere else.
Yep.
And for anybody who is the naysayer, go ahead and look at the situations and tell me how it's worse.
Right.
And if you can't point to a way it's worse and say the kids enjoy it, there's something to be said for enjoying school.
Right. And I mean, I can show you, there is national data that you can look at that says when kids are given an age-appropriate amount of recess or breaks throughout the school day, it increases student performance, reduces disciplinary issues, reduces school suspensions, and leads to higher school morale as a whole.
Right.
And so, because we had been working on it with the committee for a while, and they knew that the policy was likely to pass midway through a school year, and unless the policy says otherwise, it has to be implemented immediately.
Right.
A lot of schools started implementing it early, just so that they wouldn't have to do anything disruptive during the school year.
And I think that's sort of where we were. It was just that let's do this, let's do it and build it in so it's not a change. I knew because of the public speaking assignment that a lot of kids seem to like the idea. Just me being me, I was like, whatever, it's fine. It's fluff, but I don't know that's going to hurt anything. And as we're doing it, I don't think it's caused any problems that I can tell. And I know at least some kids use that time well to go take a walk or to sit down and talk to friends or do whatever. So much, and my perspective thinking about juniors and seniors in high school, say compared to thinking about how things are going to work out in third or fourth grade, we're trying to do the same thing, but a very different audience, very different customer base, so to speak. And it's one where I just think, could you call it recess? Probably. People would probably hate it. In the end, one of the biggest battles that we fight towards the end of high school is that kids just don't want to be there. Or your most capable kids think they could be doing something better or different. And your kids who are... Actually, a lot of the most capable kids are also the kids who are getting in trouble because they don't want to be there, right? And so I think giving, whether that's either a little more choice in what they're doing or at least a little bit of time to themselves, if you can like being a place, you do better. I always say those are my two goals in my classroom. I want you to learn as much as you reasonably can. Not as much as you possibly can, because as much as you possibly can will lead to misery. As much as you reasonably can.
Yeah.
And I would like you to enjoy most of it. And I tell them, you're not going to enjoy all of it. I'm not even going to try to make you enjoy all of it. Some of this you just have to do. You're never going to love learning semicolons, but play along and you will learn them. But if you don't hate being here, you'll do better.
Is criminally underused.
Oh yeah. I give that speech every year. Yeah. But I just tell them if you hate being somewhere, you will almost never give your best effort. You dread it, you avoid it, and that's a bad way to be. So when you can find, especially little things to do, free up 10 or 15 minutes in the day, when there are things you can do to increase people's enjoyment of it, all kinds of other problems start to reduce or go away, because a lot of those other problems aren't that the kid doesn't know how to behave. They just don't feel good about what they're doing. If you can find little ways to make them feel better, I'm all for it,
I had a really interesting conversation last month with John Gabriel, the principal of Independence High School.
Yep, new school.
And I was intrigued by something I had read on his blog about challenging teachers to be fire starters instead of fire extinguishers on the first day of school.
Right.
Where, first day, 95, 98% of kids, are pretty excited on the first day of school, even if they won't outwardly admit it.
Yeah.
They want to see the new classes they're taking, they want to meet their new teachers, they want to see their friends, after they may not have seen all summer.
See what's going on there.
Right. And then you go in to your first class, 9 in the morning or whatever it is. And what happens on the first day of class? Your teacher spends the next 45 minutes going over the syllabus.
Yeah.
And going over the grading policy. And going over, and it's probably the most boring day of school you'll have all year.
It is. Yeah.
And so his challenge was, you have to kindle that fire that kids are coming in with, because it may not last long if you don't.
If you have any momentum, use it now.
Right. His specific challenge, aside from the metaphor, was give your most interesting lesson on the first day of school.
Right.
And save the syllabus for day 2 or day 3 or
I actually started doing that about 5 years ago.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just realized, because I asked kids at the end of a first day of school. It was probably about 4 or 5 years ago, and I just said, hand up if you've spent the entire day learning about rules, grading policies, and materials. And almost every hand went up. And I said, if you didn't raise your hand, did you do something interesting today? And of the kids who didn't, only 2 of them raised their hands. And I thought, I can do this better. So now we do, it's English, but, it's American Lit or AP Lang, whatever. So I have them, I spend a lot of time teaching them to sort of think analytically. You spent I was telling them, you spend your whole life learning how to read what is on the page. And at this point, you got it or you don't. So we're going to spend all year about how and why. How'd they write it? Why'd they write it? How's this, sort of have this effect? Whatever. And so now we do Johnny Cash, Man in Black, and they annotate it and then talk about whatever social issues connect back to it.
Okay.
Most of them we end up addressing at some point throughout the year. And then the second day of class, we do Peter Tosh's Equal Rights. And then it sets up their first writing assignment. What's more important, peace or justice? Mm-hmm. And his argument is you can never have peace if you don't have justice first. But kids can reasonably disagree. So we're 2.5, 3 days in before I ever tell them how class is going to go. Mm-hmm. At that point, you don't really have to tell them. They already have a decent sense of how class is going to go.
Right.
Much better response. So the fact that, say, there's a principal saying, let's do this, and I remember it was. You're getting old as a teacher when you're not that excited on the first day of school. I'm excited about it, but I go to bed just fine. I go in and people are like, oh, I couldn't sleep last night. And I was like, I slept like a baby. But that year I remember being a little nervous, just thinking this is weird, but it works well, and that for a principal to say, deliver that message to the whole school, it's good. Because if you can't get them interested on the first day, mm-hmm. what are you going to do on day 177?
Right. You can. It's really hard to spark that midway through the year.
Yeah, to reignite.
Yeah. I still remember I think the first class I had I remember being interesting on the first day was a college course. It was Introduction to Energy Sources, which was mostly nuclear engineering. So it was a pretty interesting subject, but you could try your best to make it dry if you really wanted to.
Yeah.
But the class started and the teacher wasn't there, and everyone was just kind of looking around wondering, do we really invoke the 5-minute rule on the first day of class? And then there was just a bang and a flash of smoke, and the smoke cleared, and the professor was standing in the front of the classroom. He literally appeared in a puff of smoke on the first day. And there was, I don't remember much else from that class, but I can't say I use nuclear energy sources on a daily basis, but I do remember that. Things like that really stick with you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's, as much as, say, teachers or instructors, a lot of my job is acting in sales. I got to act like I am into or not into a lot of things, and I have to sell. I always say, imagine somebody has a really useful tool for you that you just don't want. I don't want to buy it. I don't want to spend the money. I don't want it. I don't know what it's going to do for me, but it is of value. My job is to sell something you will use, but that you don't want. Mm-hmm. And so while you're a counselor, you're a teacher, you're whatever. spent a lot of time thinking about sales and acting, and so sometimes say like starting class with a bang, maybe in that case literally, yeah, like that it can go a long way because you gotta grab people's interest one way or another. So all right, so I got my last question, and we get anything else you want to talk about or ask about. But thinking about engagement, and again, whether it's personal, just for entertainment, enjoyment, or something that's had an impact on you through your education life, a book or a movie or a couple of each, what would you recommend, or what do you find yourself regularly recommending to other people? What are you into?
Oh, so many recommendations. This was one of the few questions I knew you were going to ask in advance, because it's one of your standard questions, but it's still like, do I stop the list at 50? Do I stop at 100? What do I do?
And I usually warn people, and it's funny, this is always the hardest one. Like if you go back and you look at the other episodes of the podcast, it's amazing how many people freeze. And I've warned every person ahead of time I'm going to ask them, and they go, well, I don't know. And I get like two things. I'm like, I know this is the one you're going to kick yourself later on too. So you got a lot.
Here we go.
All right.
Okay. So with movies, I would say my favorite education-related movie is Stand and Deliver. Classic. Just absolutely classic. Edward James Olmos and Lou Diamond Phillips in the same movie, you just can't go wrong. No. And the fact that it was based on a true story, and to this day there's controversy on whether the kids cheated on the
whether they cheated or not,
and
some people now are like, he was an awful teacher, he was so mean, he's whatever, and it's like, I don't know, man, he did a great thing for some kids who probably needed it.
He did, yeah, and I mean, it's inspirational, the story of what he did, what the school that he went into, and what he was able to accomplish.
They tell it very well,
Right, and it actually ties pretty well to one of my favorite books, which is called Beggars in Spain. It's a pretty obscure science fiction novel, although it did win some awards back in the 90s when it came out. Beggars in Spain by Nancy Kress, if you're listening at home.
I'll link it. Yeah, that's good.
And so the actual plot of the book is about a genetic engineering improvement that allows people to be born without the need to sleep. And it turns out for those people, it leads to them becoming super intelligent, like freakishly intelligent, where they all go on to run Fortune 500 companies and invent incredible things, and basically become well, they don't exactly take over the world, but they basically become the think tank for the world, the thought leadership. Right. And so the main philosophical question of the book is, what do you owe the beggars in Spain? With the title of the book. Right. So, if you go to Spain and a beggar asks you for $1, you might give it to them. Right. If 3 beggars come up to you and each ask you for $1, maybe. Yeah. If an entire city of people come up to you and each ask you for $1, even if you're in a position where you can provide it, are you obligated to you? Right. Should you? Right. What do you owe the beggars in Spain? Okay. And so the characters struggle with that through the whole book. Right. And then the kind of the money quote at the end of the book, which I really like, is that there are no permanent beggars. The beggar you give $1 to today can rise up and change the world tomorrow. Right. And so I think that's really stuck with me, and is a really interesting way of looking at that, and kind of ties back to Stand and Deliver, which is about going into a school which had no concept of what an AP program would look like, or an AP class would look like, and shows that you can become almost anything if you set your mind to it. Yeah, and you have the support system in place.
Right, I saying that's you got to have the right people and sort of the support to get it done. But that's a good one. That's good.
Okay, and then other kind of non-education related recommendations. As far I'm 8 movies out of 10 at this point are kids movies that I watch with the little ones. Yeah. And I think the Iron Giant for me still holds up as, I think, probably the best kids movie I've ever seen. Nice, that's good. A lot of the kids who are going through childhood now have never seen it because it's a little before their time. But I'd highly recommend for any parents listening out there.
I did show that one to my son, but I think he was probably a little too young. I mean, he's 3. He's about to be 3.5. He's 3.5. He was probably like 2. And it was, he was sort of into it for a little bit, and then I wandered off. I'm like, man, this is a great movie. And I was like, you have no idea what's going on. We'll try this again in a year. A year and a half. We'll get you in 2 years. Like, yeah, that's one I like that a lot as a kid. Yeah, at this point, I've basically just memorized Cars and The Incredibles. I can almost recite them.
Almost falling behind.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to ask an extension question on it that I probably only asked once or twice, and if you don't have an answer, that's fine. Don't feel bad about it. But is there something that you were shown or that you read in school at any level, K through 12 through graduate school, like a book or a movie, and it doesn't have to be in an English class, but that had a lasting impact? Because I think what happens a lot of times is we either read stuff to pass tests, to write a paper, and so you sort of push through with that goal and you forget it, or I read the Spark Notes or the Cliff Notes and fake it as well as I can. But sometimes there's one or two that hang on. Is there something in school that you like that stands out as a memory or that you actually enjoyed? And if not, you would certainly not be alone in that. So I'm not being critical if not. But.
I think the only thing that comes to mind offhand was a college class where we read part of People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn.
Yeah.
And we only read a small excerpt of it in class, but then it got me interested enough that I read the whole book on my own time.
Right.
And at the time, a pretty sheltered college student, it was pretty eye-opening in the way it really deconstructed all of our national heroes.
Yeah.
And presented the story of our country from a different point of view.
Yeah, I love it.
And it just... The point of presenting it in class was to do exactly that.
Yeah.
And the part that, first of all, it's just incredible to be able to do something like that. It's a brilliantly written book.
Right.
But then it leads to the question, why isn't more of that taught in school itself?
Right.
Before college.
Ask those questions. It's funny you say that. My AP classes... we did a new project this year. I just sort of did something new on the fly and it went well, but it put us behind a couple of days where we normally are. My AP classes for homework this weekend are reading the first chapter of that book.
You're kidding.
They normally read, because it's an introduction to the book and to the biases of all history and Christopher Columbus. So it's an introduction and content chapter at once. I usually assign it over Columbus Day weekend.
Yeah.
Enjoy your day off, read it, take a few notes. And we're going to talk about it next week, and we tie in a song and some other stuff. But that's literally, I just got done talking about why we're reading the first chapter of it in an English class. They're like, isn't that a history book? I'm like, just trust me. We got to work on perspective. We got to work on bias and purpose. Read it, and remember you were supposed to read it last weekend. Yeah, that's a great.
That's incredible. That's
a good coincidence.
That's a good coincidence.
Yeah, we're a week late, but whatever.
Yeah. Some other school board candidates kind of constantly make fun of me for like my constant hatred of Columbus Day. So that book is definitely to blame in opening my eyes.
Yeah. Well, that's one where I always say you got to be careful, like, judging him after the fact, but like, he's probably not a great guy, and it's sort of a weird way to get the holiday anyway. And it's one of those things that no one ever wants to get rid of a holiday. We could probably stand to add a couple more to the calendar as is.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're hurting anybody by renaming it. If that's what people want to do, that's okay. But you got to be careful because you could just as easily, and if you've read the rest of the book, you could just as easily point at a bunch of presidents and a few generally liked ones that are only marginally better off, at least in certain ways. And I always tell them, I say, it's not, my job isn't to tell you what to think. You don't have to agree with them at all. I got to help you to read it better and help you to argue about it better. And so I have to give you something that helps you to think. And that book serves the purpose well. So I tell them, you don't have to love any of it. You don't have to agree with a word of it, but you need to consider it. And then we have like a little discussion and class debate about it. And it does that job well. Whether you love Columbus at the end or not, it forces you to ask a lot of questions, of what you're learning in school.
It's a book best read in small chunks because it can get pretty depressing if you try to read it, if you try and read it all in one go.
At this point, I want to say, to be honest, I don't even know if I've read all of it. Because you do, I read a chapter or two, and I'm like, I'm going to sit that down. And come back to it later. I don't know. I've probably still a few sections I probably still haven't gotten to.
I'm a pretty voracious reader, so by naturally, I'll go through a book in a couple of days, but I remember that being one of the few that I got kind of halfway through it, and I said, I think I need a mental health break from my recreational reading, and I'm going to kind of put this on the shelf for a while and come back to it later.
I need to go stack my cups.
Yeah, exactly. I need to go stack my cups.
That's good. All right, so before we wrap up, and you say basically get a free mic and free platform, if there's anything that you want to talk about or you just want to say that we haven't addressed, or while you have a captive audience of a teacher, anything you want to ask, or whatever, you have a free mic. So is there anything you'd want to talk about before we wrap up here officially?
Sure. So as far as the free mic aspect of it, anyone who's listening who's interested in learning more about me, please feel free to visit my website at ianserotkin.org or my Facebook page. If you search for I'm the only Ian Serotkin in the world. It's an uncommon name. Nice. So if you search for that, you'll find my Facebook page and be able to find a lot more information about me. As far as I would like to ask you a question, because I know I think I'm the last school board candidate who you're interviewing.
We've got one more that I don't think is going to happen, but
okay.
we continue to look for a matching schedule day, so okay. I'm not holding my breath.
Only 18 days to go.
Yeah.
It's getting the crunch time.
Yeah.
But I'm really intrigued by your question of, something I asked to all the superintendent, the assistant superintendents, and principals who I met with was, if you could snap your fingers and money is no object, you can make any change you wanted to a school, what would you do? And that really ties pretty well into your question that you asked me tonight. So I'd like to turn that one back around on you. And, if you were, supreme ruler of LCPS and, you could set up a model school or close to perfect school in the way that you wanted, what would you do, or what changes would you propose?
I mean, I think, and I'm thinking high school level because that's where I work and probably what I understand best. I really think the old reading, writing, and arithmetic had a lot more wisdom in it than maybe we recognize, because I think we've gotten away from it. There's so many things we try to learn, so many things we try to do. Mm-hmm. And I think for a long time we've pushed to breadth rather than depth. And with the push back towards some student choice or project-based stuff, I think we're moving a little more back to depth. I think that every kid should take a math class and an English class, but I also think you should be able to choose. I don't think the ultimate goal is for every kid to get to calculus. I think you should get to calculus if you're going to use it or you have an interest in it. But, I'm amazed by how many kids we have in calculus who can't do simple multiplication and division in their heads. And they're very smart. They're much better at math than I am. Mm-hmm. But, if I took them golfing, they would need a calculator to total their score.
Add up the pars.
And I think... So I think that everyone should be working on literacy and numeracy. And I think that could take up half of your school day. And you could probably create either a little closer to the college system where you can choose your classes. And by the way, English doesn't have to be Shakespeare. Like, I would have no problem with offering a literacy through comics or, whatever. Like, again, a little more sort of college style. We need you to have these skills, but there's a lot of different ways to get them. I think as long as you're in school, and probably for your whole life, but certainly while you're in school, you should always be working on literacy and numeracy. And for the rest of it, I think that either kids should have a little more choice in the classes. If you want to take all science classes, I don't know that we need to stop you from doing that. I don't know, a lot of the high school history and science is just deeper levels of learning of stuff they already learned when they were younger. And not that we need to make middle school harder, but if we hit some of that content a little bit harder early, I would be very happy to either give kids the option to either choose their classes or to do a real project-based sort of thing. You can take an internship in the community. You can use the resources in the building, use the teachers as advisors. I just think some of the best stuff I learned in high school, I was on the production team of a high school musical, and I wasn't really into musicals. We did the advertising, the programs, and all that. Mm-hmm. My junior year, we raised $43,000 for 4 nights of The Wizard of Oz. It was a team of 12 kids. We raised the money from the community. I learned more doing that than probably anything else I did in high school. And we had a good gifted program where it was enrichment, not extension. They didn't just stuff you in AP. You did projects. You went on a lot of field trips. And I probably learned more that I actually use in those opportunities to either work on some projects or, where I was doing a little more. And so if it was up to me, you take a math class of your choosing and you take an English class of your choosing, and the rest of the day we either give you choice in the subjects or we let you sort it out, within the parameters of we need to demonstrate some competency. Mm-hmm. How much do you know about the War of 1812? But I bet you spent a week and a half, 2 weeks learning it, though, and that maybe wasn't time well spent.
I could tell you the White House burned down, the federal government fled. It was in 1812.
Yeah.
To 1814, and that's probably about it.
And you just did better than like 70% of Americans, right? and I don't mean to trivialize that. Like, people need to know that. So I would never say get rid of it. I just think we talk a lot about individuality and embracing people's uniqueness, and then we put everybody in the same classes at the same periods of time. Like, we worry a lot about late graduation. We never really talk about early graduation. Like, if it's a problem for a kid to stay until he's 20, then shouldn't we also be okay with them leaving when they're 16? Like, if you have the skills, why are we keeping you here? And so if we're going to keep you here, then something with a little bit more freedom is what I would do. Mm-hmm. Literacy, numeracy, sort it out and use your brain. Okay. That'd be messy at first, but that's what I would do.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah. That's also why I don't need to be in charge of anything, because it's a fine idea, and then you figure out, how would you do that? I have no idea. I have no idea how you do that. That's tricky. I wish I'd thought that out better. I probably could answer that question faster. Sorry about that. You're the first person that's turned it back on me. I'm like, oh God, I could spend 6 months on this if I really wanted to. But, yeah. Anything else?
I don't think so. I think we've covered it pretty well.
Awesome. Well, then, again, I really appreciate the time. I know it's busy and we're getting close to the end for you. So I appreciate you taking the time to do this, and I wish you a lot of luck in 18 days.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you.